2, and we're live. Good day, whiskey brothers and sisters. We're honored to have you, the viewer, and our panel with here tonight. My name's Dolph. I'm president of the Alberta Scotch Society. I'm the founder of the Whisky Book Club, and I'm your host tonight. For those new to us, I'm going to explain a little bit what we're about, if you haven't already heard. We're a group of whiskey geeks that love to share a dram and our passion for reading, mostly about whiskey or whiskey-related activities. The choice of our present tome for this Whisky Book Club is our third book, and it was inspired initially by our sense of adventure and my long-held desire to do the Whiskey Trail in Scotland or the Bourbon Trail with our friends down south. Canada's got so much history, so much whiskey. Why not do our very own Whiskey Bourbon Trail? But we're Canadians. We're going to change the name. It's going to be a Canadian Whisky Journey. That's what we're doing. So thanks to Blair and Davin's tour guidebook with loads of pictures, which are good for Dave and I because we like the visual stuff. We like to see our pictures, the maps, directions, suggestions, checklists. Because of that, we've got the direction we need. We've got the inside track to the distilleries we crave. And the distillery we crave right now is right there in front of you. You can see it. Still Waters. Well, you can see Barry to the side. Davin and Blair are going to be our spirits guides tonight on this journey as we cross this vast, beautiful country of ours. When we're done our first hour, though, stick around because we're going to continue the fun, as you know, with our relaxed atmosphere, more drink-centered broadcast called The After Dram. And it starts 5 minutes after this ends, plus or minus a couple minutes. So what we're going to do now, we're going to start our round table introductions with our names, our other platform handles, as well as our prepared highlighted dram of the night. And mine, or the one I think we all have, is this one, is the rye. Others might have the single malt. And we also have the 3-barrel, which I'm going to show you later. So we'll do that. We're going to start with Davin and Blair, our spirits guides, continue with our special guest, Barry, and then on to Dave. Davin, you're up.
Hi, I'm Davin de Kergommeaux. Blair and I wrote this book, The Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries, your guide to 257 distilleries in Canada. We have maps, how to get there, where to go next, and so on. And I was drinking until 3 seconds ago this Stock and Barrel 3-barrel whiskey, which I have to say is wonderful, very malty. But when Dolph said we were drinking rye, well, I switched to the Stock and Barrel 100% rye.
Excellent.
And Davin, at Davin DEK on Instagram and Twitter.
Thank you, sir.
Blair Phillips, co-author of The Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries. I am having some, right now I'm just enjoying some Stock and Barrel Blue Blend. Yes. And I have several others on standby.
Nice. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Barry Bernstein. I'm one of the co-founders of Phillips-Still Distillery, maker of Stock and Barrel whiskey. I have in front of me as well a bottle of our cask strength rye, which I'm enjoying. Some of the 3-barrel whiskey, one of our newer releases. And I also pulled out the only one of our single malts that I could find, which happens to be a cask sample of a 10-year-old single malt.
And you said cask number 7. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. Looking forward to that one day. Dave, you're up. Oh, sorry.
Hang on a second.
Let's do that again, Dave.
Oh, what happened? All right.
Oh, you're good now.
Okay. Hi, guys. It's Yukon Dave coming from his basement as usual, drinking a white label Stock and Barrel that I found out was really old, and it fits my personality 100%. And I'm surprised they let me back on after the last disaster.
I can't remember any disasters, Dave. Anyways, guys,
I use that line every week.
Oh yeah, I'm double fisting it right here. So I've got the barrel strength, cask strength rye, 100% rye, and the single barrel. So back and forth, I'll go from those two tonight, or for the next hour. We're going to start this off with a little bit of background information from this guy right here. So from that book, I'll read the quote directly. So in March 2009, longtime friends Barry Stein and Barry Bernstein kicked off a distilling boom that has seen over 200 new distilleries open up across the country. As with many of Canada's first micro distillers, the partners set out to make single malt whiskey. Right there. Canadian law states grain spirit must spend at least 3 years in barrels before it becomes whiskey, and that's a long time to wait to make a sale. Their solution, instant sales with still waters single malt vodka, which we're going to be talking about soon. So Davin and Blair, what did you mean by kicked off a distilling boom? So what do you mean by that for me, please?
That's one of Davin's famous lines from the book. Isn't it?
Go ahead, Davin. I guess it's up to you.
You know, we've had a few micro distillers in the past in Canada.
Yep.
You know, like we had Reader in Grimsby since I think 1972. We had Wine Garden out in New Brunswick. But really, the craft distilling movement started about 10 years ago, and Barry and Barry were the first ones to come in with this new movement, and they really kind of paved the way for anyone who came. You find all the distillers have come since then really kind of owe them, especially in Ontario, owe them a real debt of gratitude. So really, they introduced this new idea of distilling in small stills, and I mean, it's huge now. As I said, we have 257 of them all together in our book, but they were the first ones in Ontario. And they paved the way, but I think that they suffered a lot of the hardships that other people were able to learn from. So, hats off to Barry Steen and Barry Bernstein and Stillwater's Distillery.
And people will be very happy that they went through it and not themselves. Were they the first in Canada, Davin?
Well,
first micro?
It's hard to say, because I mean, Wine Garden was there, but what they were doing was something entirely different. And Reader was there, but by that time they'd become 40 Creek. So right. it's kind of hard to say. I think of this movement. They're the first ones that I know of. I know that Frank Dieter had Okanagan Spirits. I can't remember when that was, but Barry and Barry were the first ones to actually get our attention as micro distillers in Canada, and they're the ones that the media that kind of got the media excited about micro distilling. So honestly, it's hard to know who really was first, and it's actually it's not a really big deal to be first, except for these guys who had to do a lot of groundwork to get going.
Yeah, I think there were 9 in total.
Pardon me?
There was about 9 distilleries when Stillwaters came on the scene, but as you say, they're the very first to not. The other ones were all cottage industries, like little small eau-de-vie places and stuff like that. But Stillwaters was the first to take on the whole entire world, so to speak.
Were you the first single malt then, maybe? Coming back out of
I think they were, Dolph.
Okay, good.
Certainly the first one to get any attention, yeah.
All right. Barry, let's start with a bit of your. So I've compiled some information from some YouTube videos and a whole bunch of articles that I have, and I'll read off some of these so I don't make you repeat it, but I'd like you to fill in anything at the end to your Genesis story, if that's all right. So we see that you and Barry knew each other for 15 years prior to opening the distillery. You knew each other from the synagogue. You named the distillery together while at the cottage looking over the still waters of the lake. Your wives were not immediate fans of the idea of opening the distillery. My wife's laughing in the background. And I'm going to stop there. Is there anything else you could add to your Genesis story that makes it really interesting, or something neat that I really brushed over?
It was so long ago now that I can't even remember why we decided to do this. We were just two good friends that were entrepreneurs looking to do something different, and passion for whiskey, and we decided somebody had to be first, so why not us?
No, sounds good. And not presumptuous at all. It's all just two happy guys working together. It's nice. It's a good story. Although you talked about your business before, so I'm going to pump into that. There's many articles, I think two. There's two articles that mention that you were, no, all of them said both businessmen, but two referred to your importing business in 2005. So, and it refers to it, but I couldn't find anything whatsoever. So could you tell us a bit about that? And when you both decided that distillery life was better than the Scotch importing business?
Sure. Yeah. So we actually started the business in 2005. Yeah. And the idea at the time was we were both, huge Scotch drinkers, and we're frustrated with the lack of variety that we were finding here on shelf, and thought, well, you know what, there aren't any independent bottlers in Canada. What if we sourced some unique casks of Scotch and brought them over and bottled them here, and could we make a business out of that?
Okay.
So that was sort of the beginning of the business. But we always had our eye on distilling. We always thought that would be something really neat to do, and we're sort of paying attention to the movement as it was growing in the U.S.
All right. Tell me, how did that business relate to the new business? How did one tie into the other? It seems obvious, but what did you learn from the one business that really helped you in the distilling business that maybe someone else might not have gotten?
Yeah. Well, for both Barry and me, we had no industry experience. Okay. So jumping in with both feet and learning how to deal with the various levels of government, and in particular here in Ontario, the LCBO, was a real education. So that was something that that definitely helped us further down the road. But like I said, we always thought that we would like to distill. So from almost the beginning, it was something that we were doing research on. And I guess we were sort of pushed to accelerate that when the Scotch Whisky Association, we had a very good relationship with, because they knew what we were doing here, told us that there was pending legislation that would prohibit the bulk export of Scotch. So just as our business was starting to grow and we were starting to get a little bit of distribution, we knew that it wasn't going to be long-lived, that there was a serious roadblock that we could not overcome that was coming down in a few years. And that sort of, we sort of redoubled our efforts on the distilling front to get that going.
Okay. And did that roadblock actually come up? Because I know, let's say Japan still imports a massive amount, but is that because maybe they own the distillery and they're able to transport
That's
something?
Possible. I believe that you still cannot export casks of Scotch from Scotland.
Yeah. What was the name of your business, of the importing business?
Premium Bottlers.
Okay, because when I heard that for the first time, I'm thinking Barry, and I heard Barry Brothers, and no, it's not the Barry Brothers. But so okay, and it went well though. You liked it as a business. You just wanted to kind of get into distilling, right? Because it seems like a fantastic job to me, to tell you the truth, to be the importer. I know if within 2 years you're going to lose your job. I'm thinking that seems like a fantastic job to be giving up. But then distilling seems pretty fun too. So we're going to ask you about Gary Huggins, because Davin and Blair both mentioned Gary Huggins as an owner. And I'll read the quote. In the Two Barrys Make One Canadian Whiskey article, it mentions Gary being instrumental in founding another micro distillery. Could you shed some light on Gary's entry into the business?
Sure.
And then I have two other questions about that.
Yeah, sure. When we started the business in 2009, and it wasn't until a couple of years later that there were a few other groups that were looking to start their own distilleries. And in those early days, pretty much anybody in Ontario that was interested in opening their own distillery came to see us. So they wanted to visit the facility, they wanted to pick our brains, and get some advice from us, and nobody took our advice because they're still in the business. They wouldn't have entered the business if they took our advice. And one of those groups was Jeff Dillon of Dillon's and his father-in-law, Gary Huggins. So we met them quite a while ago, developed a very good relationship with them, which we still have to this day. And the first 4 micro distilleries in Ontario were the ones that founded the Ontario Craft Distillers Association. So we ended up working very closely together and developed a good friendship. And then a few years ago, when Gary left Dillon's, he was still involved in the association. He was, still had one foot in the industry, and at the same time, we were looking for a little bit of help. In particular, we needed some sales expertise, and it was a good fit.
Okay, excellent. And that same article states that your role shifted from to doing everything, because you were doing everything. I saw you on TV as well. You had the morning segments where you were on TV and doing everything there. It was kind of neat. But now you're marketing and sales. So Gary helps with that, or you're marketing sales and he's another branch of it somehow?
Yes. Yeah. So our roles definitely have shifted over the years. In the early days, we were doing everything, and my back couldn't lug bags of grain and cases anymore. So my role now has shifted. I'm more marketing and business development. Gary is still mostly in charge of sales, and the other Barry, is basically running the day-to-day operation. He's in charge of operations. But that said, we all work very closely together still, and continue to this day. So we still, are all involved in all aspects, but we do have our specialties.
All right.
Can I ask
go ahead.
Can I ask Barry a question? Hey, Barry, you said you were looking for sales expertise early on. Is that selling to the government, or because in Ontario it seems like that's your only customer?
Yeah, but it's not just one point of contact, because we actually have to sell into each individual store. So it is a traditional sales activity. We have to go store to store and speak to the salespeople and the managers, and certainly outside of the province as well.
So if you get a listing with the LCBO, you still got to make that contact with the stores.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when you said sales expertise, I was just trying to see what that actually meant, because I look at Ontario as being so closed, where you deal with the LCBO or you don't deal with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So okay,
if you can't deal with them first, I guess you're stuck. So you got to with them. One thing I didn't show everyone where it is.
Oh,
so
where's our trip?
We did this before. So Toronto, we got a little bit messed up because we went back and forth, and we were supposed to be here last week, but I had food poisoning, so we couldn't go here. And we went to Windsor, and then Windsor back up to Concord at Stillwater. So let's get rid of that and do that. I want to put this picture up though. So Stillwater single malt vodka, and I was a little bit confused because looking here, I'll get that off. Get that off. It states that you discontinued the vodka itself, and Davin or Blair, I'm not sure who wrote it, with ample whiskey on the shelves, Barry and Barry discontinued their vodka. So is it discontinued? Because I still see it online, it's still sold.
Okay. We do not sell it outside of the distillery, so it's not available at the LCBO. But we do sell it at the distillery, and the truth is, we make an awful lot of it still.
Okay.
Oh boy. Well, I wrote that. I made that mistake, Barry, and I do apologize. That was the very first micro distilled vodka that I had tasted. I was in love with that stuff.
Yeah.
And it was the very first single malt vodka I had tasted. Honestly, I think that's why I like vodka, because you guys introduced me to something that A, had flavor, B, had mouthfeel, and just it was like new make single malt whiskey with all the rough edges taken off it. It is creamy and malty with a voluptuous mouthfeel that showcases the great potential for a nascent. Did I write that?
Some bright guy out there wrote that. Yeah, that's your quote, buddy.
Okay, Gary, I love that. And I'm sorry, I thought you had discontinued it, and I should have.
Well, yeah, the truth is almost all of it, I would say, 99% of it is going into other vodkas, because we do make product for other people, and other uses. Believe it or not, there's a fairly well-known large cosmetic company that buys our vodka in bulk to put in face cleanser.
Really?
Well, you need some kind of alcohol in there, right? So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and with Davin's description there, everyone's going to want it on their face. The soft and silky. It's all beautiful.
Well, look at Davin's complexion.
It is. Top and bottom.
And I've got a lot of complexion. It goes all the way back.
Silky and soft. Okay.
Oh, jeez.
Now, when you did this for the first one, and yummy, I'm sure, and I haven't had it yet, but it's one of the other things I have to try, and there's lots of it, apparently. Did you conceive this at the time to emulate, like, because the American micro distilling boom, they had White Owl and they had white whiskey in Canada. I'm wondering if you did it because of that, or just because you wanted to play with malts first.
Yeah. In fact, I don't think White Owl came out until the following year. So I think ours was released first. But
maybe they're copying you. That's it.
No, it was for practical reasons. So we knew that it would be 3+ years before we would have a whiskey on the market, and that was our main focus. So we wanted something out there to try and bring in a little bit of cash, and also in terms of when we started the distillery, we had no practical distilling experience. So we wanted to work with malted barley, and we knew that vodka is a lot more forgiving than whiskey, because if you don't like it, just keep distilling it.
Yeah.
Right? The objective of a vodka is as pure as you can make. So just keep distilling it. And that's the reason that we started with making the vodka.
Okay.
So quick question. So malted barley was easier to work with than like cooking corn and all that kind of stuff?
No, not necessarily. In fact, I think it is, but that wasn't the reason. Our hearts were set on single malt. When we started the distillery, we were very focused on single malt. That's all that we were interested in making.
And it's a good way to practice. You were practicing it for what you were going to eventually make.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's just leave it at that. It's fantastic. It's good. Davin loved it. Everyone loves it. It's still on your website. It's still there if you want to order it. So it's good. Yeah. We're going to talk about other people that you're working with. So let me bring a picture up here. And there's this young man here.
Oh, yeah. That's my boy.
And there's this gentleman here as well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep the picture on your son for a second while I say this. So is Daniel and Derek still with you on the distillery side? And do you have any others that help you with the distillation?
Yeah.
Let's get back.
Yeah, they're both with us. And I hope they're not listening, because I don't want it to go to their head. But on a day-to-day basis, these are the guys that are doing all the hard work on the floor. So Daniel has become our master distiller. He is primarily in charge of all the mashing, the distilling, and he's doing most of the blending. Derek is primarily involved in the packaging side. So Derek runs the bottling line. And I mean, they both share responsibility somewhat, but that's their primary responsibilities. And we have, I think want to say 4 other full-time people that are working on the floor as well, primarily on the packaging side.
Okay, so very few people working with Daniel. Daniel's doing all the distilling essentially.
Yeah, pretty much, with some help from Derek, but yeah.
Okay, excellent, good. Let's talk about wood maturation, because I have an article that says that wood maturation was the greatest concern back in 2017. Is that still the case? Your wood program, your barrel program, and if that is still the case, or do you not care anymore because your son's doing it all? It's all his.
No, I mean, the concern really is that, we have a lot of control over what we do until the spirit goes into wood. And once it goes into the barrel, there's not a lot we can do. And that's where the concern is. And that's what makes us nervous is, 3+ years, what's coming out of it, is it going to be any good? Do we still worry about it? Of course we do. I don't think that worry ever goes away, and I certainly hope that that Daniel and Derek share that concern. They're very conscientious, and I'm sure they do. It's something that we just can't control that well.
Does your partner Barry have a child that wants to get into the business, just aching to get into the distilling business too?
No, his oldest, who is friends with my oldest. They're the same age, both named Daniel, believe it or not.
I do believe it.
Now he's a paramedic.
Okay.
So we hope not to see him too often when we're working.
All right. No.
Drop by with friends and show it off. It's good.
But they come for hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
The pictures I have in there might have one, because I do have a paramedic in my pictures. We'll get to that in a bit. Blair, do me a favor. Could you put up that bottle that you had of their first single malt?
Yeah.
Now that came out on Saturday, April 27th. Sorry, what year? 2017?
13.
Well,
12?
12, not 17. 5 years before. Blair and Davin, did either of you go to the opening?
I was there.
And that's where you got that bottle. That original bottle. Yeah.
And this one. And this. No, wait. That's the wrong one. And that one.
And that one.
So yeah, no, it was super exciting. Davin, his website, CanadianDistilleries.org or CanadianWhiskey.org, really brought that release to life. And I remember going to, it was a warm day, wasn't it, Barry?
yeah.
In April? For April, it was really warm and it was sunny. There's a long lineup snaking through the parking lot. I was there to pick up bottles for Davin and myself. And Barry and Barry were just basically at the cash, just like, here you go, next guy. Here you go, next guy.
Yeah.
It was quite incredible.
Are they signed, Blair?
No, they're not.
Oh, you got to get Barry to sign that. Both Barrys.
Yeah. Well, no, we were just talking before this, and I think I need to bring this up to the distillery sometime, because it sounds like you guys are out completely. Like, you don't even have your own stash, right?
Yeah, I think actually we kept a case each from those first 3 casks somewhere. I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
It's a big warehouse. There's somewhere stacked. Or your son might have sold it. I don't know.
It's possible.
Thinking he's going off on a nice vacation. Probably make a nice vacation. Davin, so what did you do? Well, Blair referred to the article and how you promoted it. How did you promote it?
Well, I don't really know how I promoted it, except I talked about it a lot for 2 reasons. Because it was exciting that we were making whiskey in Canada, or micro distilling whiskey in Canada, but also whatever I tasted from those guys was always really, really well crafted. It was really good. And so I don't know, I must have just said what I honestly felt. And it's funny, because I keep thinking, like, there are like way over 250 distilleries in Canada. There are over 70 that are making whiskey. I think most of them single malt. And yet Stillwater's always seems to stay in that upper echelon. mean, there's lots of good whiskey coming along for sure, but there's something that they're doing is just right. So at 3 years old, their whiskey was really quite good. At 4 years old, their whiskey is great. And I remember I had a discussion with somebody once. They said, this is great, but it doesn't taste like Macallan or something like that. I said, yeah, but when it's 12 years old, it's got to be good as a 12-year-old Macallan. And I'm dying to see what happens to that 10-year-old that you have, Barry. I'm hoping that's going to be in a bottle someday, because I don't know. There's something about what they were doing. It just really caught my attention. And remember back then, I was a big single malt guy with the Malt Maniacs and all that. And so I was like really into single malt with Scotch single malt whiskey. And it was just very exciting that something this good was being made in Canada. So it was as simple as that. I don't know, Blair, what I said that brought it to your attention, but anyway,
you were just what you said. You're a fan at the time, and you would often chime in on the release coming up, and yeah.
I have to say though, one of my favorite stories was walking into another micro distillery and having the distiller say to me, "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face around here." Because I'm always honest, as you learned a few weeks ago, Dave.
I felt honest. That many times.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a good thing. Yeah. You have given us some less than favorable reviews on some of the stuff we've been working on in the past. I don't know if you recall, but it's we always appreciated. So, we would occasionally, when we saw you, we'd say, "Hey, Davin, taste this," and you were very honest, and that's helpful.
Yeah, well,
you always need friends like that. It's nice to have the sheep. It's nice to have your yes man from time to time to make yourself feel good. But you rely on your friends to tell you the truth about yourself. So that's what you are, Davin. Be proud of that. That's good. Barry, quick question. Going back, because you and Barry were both lovers of single malt and Scotch. Let's say Scotch. Where did your tastes lie? What was your favorite type of Scotches, let's say, and how much did that influence what you wanted to make out of your own single malt?
It's interesting because both Barry and I are partial or were partial to Islay malts.
Me too.
Yeah, but we never had any desire to do a peated malt because it was something that we just felt it wasn't really Canadian. So we wanted to make a Canadian single malt. I mean, it's interesting because certainly over the years, my tastes have changed a lot. So I don't drink nearly as much Scotch as I used to, and I'm drinking a lot more rye and Canadian whiskey.
Me too. Yeah, and we are too. And we're gonna say that's all because of Davin, because you might not. He did our first Whisky Book Club, and with us, we're the Alberta Scotch Society. Most of us all Scotch lovers, and we Scotch snobs. And then when we read the first book, getting into the history of, Canadian whiskey. And then as we got through the book, it was newer distilleries, and we talked about yours and had yours as well. It was, your tastes do change when you have a newer appreciation of something different. It's when in your mind you start deciding that it doesn't have to taste like Scotch, and then start appreciating what's in front of you, not in comparison to Scotch or Islay and how many ppms of peat there is, because I do love my peat and I still do, but Canadian whiskey it's coming to the forefront for us, and we're really happy about it. So Davin's the one for that, but you were one of the highlighted distilleries that kind of changed our mind in that with the first one. Dave, how long ago was that, the first book?
23 weeks ago. 23
weeks, because we were 23 Saturdays in a row. And
yeah, I thought I screwed up last week, but
no, that was me.
I want to say that this is because of Davin. This has been a real education, and until you can understand something, how do you make a judgment on it? And now that I understand more about Canadian whiskey, I've enjoyed it way more than I ever did.
Yeah, I think
that's all kind of you to say.
I'm sucking up to you all the time.
Just Davin talked about when he's describing your distillery, a new twist. So how do we say it? A new twist to Canadian style pot distillation. Okay, where you don't place the unfiltered wort in a beer still, but you go directly into the pot still for a stripping run. So, one, I'm sure you still do it. Why did you do it? And why did you initially do it? And what kept you doing it, please?
Yeah, I mean, the practice is not uncommon with micro distilleries. So, I mean, we the part that we were most nervous about when we started was mashing and fermenting. And people that brewers, for example, that's they live and breathe that, and they're very comfortable with that. We had no training in that. We fumbled through it, and we just, the idea of lautering, and we were looking at what some of the guys were doing in the US, and we thought, no, let's try that. Let's just try distilling on the grain. Our equipment was specifically designed to accommodate that. So the way that the heating jacket works and the agitator within the pot still would prevent scorching, which is one of the challenges in distilling on the grain. And that's what we did, and we still do it. Over time, though, we have modified, particularly the flour that we use, the milling. So we started with quite a coarse grind, and we're now using a much finer flour, which basically leaves no solids by the time we're done.
But
Almost completely dissolves, is what you're saying?
Yep.
But that's education over the years, so you've learned.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And I could say the same thing about what we did 12 years ago. We don't do today.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So yeah.
And if you don't continue, if you don't get better, you get stagnant. So it makes sense. I'm going to put a quote up, Barry. So on your website, so this is directly from your website, I'm stealing this. As we began to put our business plan together and to learn the intricacies of the laws, regulations, and policies at federal, provincial, and municipal levels, we quickly realized the reason no one had previously succeeded in starting a small batch distillery in Ontario. It seemed at that time, every turn we were being told no, or faced onerous restrictions, but we were determined, or just plain stubborn, and worked through enough of the problems to feel confident we could open, even if it meant accepting a less than perfect business environment. So you explained this a bit more in another article. It's called Two Berries Make One Canadian Whiskey, and state that you had to deal with issues at the federal, provincial, and municipal level. Here comes the question after all that. Sorry. Most other distillers mention the provincial problems. So Patent 5 and Last Straw spoke more about the municipal problems. What were the federal issues that you could talk about for us?
Sure. So when we started going back to 2005, our importing business, we actually needed an excise license and had an excise spirits and an excise warehouse license. Those are, in fact, the same licenses you need to distill. So when we started to really explore distilling, we thought, okay, we're all licensed, let's go. So we spoke to our excise officer, and he immediately said, you can't do that. And we were like, well, why not? It's the same license. And he said, well, it may be the same license technically, but we are not going to allow you to do that. And well, why? And we're like 4-year-olds, who keep saying why. And the more we dug into the regulation, we couldn't see any reason why. We persisted and had many meetings with the excise people, and it got to the point where basically they said, they started to give us reasons why, which was, we weren't big enough. We didn't have the right kind of equipment. You required this and you required that, and micro distilling, what you guys are talking about, you won't have that, and we're not familiar with it. So finally they said, okay, if you document what you plan on doing with your equipment, your processes, your inputs, your outputs, expected yields in great detail, we'll take a look. And we did that and produced a thick document, which had, it was incredible detail on what we proposed to do. And they said, okay, we'd like to come in and review it with you. And they actually came in with the entire Southern Ontario excise team. So, basically, it wasn't so much, and in fairness, it wasn't so much to give us a hard time and to grill us. It was, they had never seen a micro distillery before. They had just, they were used to the model, and if you go to, back in the day, I don't know if it's still true, but, Hiram Walker, for example, would have an excise officer that lived in the distillery day to day. I mean, that was their job. So that was sort of the model that they were looking at, and just they couldn't get their head around how we could do things in a way that would satisfy their requirements, which were to, the bottom line, being able to properly keep track of alcohol, because it's all about taxation for the Sierra. And they wanted assurances that what would happen would satisfy their requirements to do that. Okay. So in the end, they said, okay, here's the license. And not only were we audited frequently, but the excise officer was a regular visitor. Like, I'm talking every few weeks. Okay. He was nearby. But he was in our facility a lot.
Okay, so let's say it was kind of a training exercise for them. They were learning as well, and you helped them out. That's very nice of you, actually. Business-wise, it made sense. Did they buy anything when they went there? They didn't try to get a little bit under the table? Nothing like that? Sorry, these are the type of questions we ask in the aftergram usually.
Not that we're talking about.
Okay. I'm going to stick with your website here. And another comment you had on your website is this, and I'll find the quote if I can, right there. So we're proud of the mentoring and encouragement we provided others during this time, and our key role in lobbying various levels of government to address the many roadblocks for small distilleries. So is the reason why distilleries like Last Straw, who gave you tons of praise and love a week and a half ago, are not complaining as much about the provincial government? Because they're not. It's because of the work that you put in, I'm sure. Let's say that. Maybe you don't want the praise, but I think that's it. Because most of the people we've talked to now, it's not really provincially. The newer distillers, it's more, well, in the same place you are, the same city, they were having more of a problem there in Concord than they did provincially.
Yeah.
And I think that might be because of you guys. You just paved the way. Can you name the most important roadblock that you can take credit for, even if you might not want to? Something you can help, that you say that I think this helped a lot of people.
I mean, certainly we were quite vocal with all levels of government, and I don't think it's any single thing. I think it was two things. I think it was education, which obviously there were other people involved, and making the various levels of government aware of what microdistilling was, and just helping build the industry. It's just encouraging other people to enter the business, because in the end, what's helped, I don't think is our, it's not the efforts that we put in, it's the momentum, and it's having a much larger voice when there's many distillers asking for things.
All right. Good.
But Barry, I agree. Education was the main role. But you and Gary Huggins, I mean, you did a lot to educate politicians, but also to educate bureaucrats. And your legacy is there. The politicians are all gone, but your legacy is still there with the bureaucrats. And and I think it really was a difficult time, because I mean, when Gary was leading that charge, it was really a great thing. But you kind of went into a bit of the association kind of went into a meltdown, because you kind of got like a pathological pugilist in there who, even if they liked him, he would ask for more. And it's like, I'm going to have a fight because I want to sue you guys. And so I think that Ontario, unlike any other province, started out really, really well, and I don't think that entirely the association has ever recovered from one really difficult personality.
Okay.
And please don't comment on that, because I've already got a lawyer's letter telling me not to talk about this. So
Okay. Then
Well,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Blair.
no, I was going to ask Barry. When you guys opened up, wasn't there a Ontario law where you had to have a ridiculously massive still, and there was like the minimum size, was it 4,000 liters or something crazy?
5,000. Yeah. I think I haven't had a chance. I assume Davin and Blair have had a chance to visit a hell of a lot more of the micro distilleries than I have, but I've never been to another that doesn't have a tasting room and doesn't have some street presence, and we're, from what I've seen, a bit of an outlier, and that's based on our history. So we're in an industrial unit, so in an industrial park, no foot traffic. The place is a ghost town after 5 o'clock and on weekends. And the reason is because there was that requirement to have a 5,000 liter pot still in order to be able to sell direct to the public. So we were told outright that law will never change. You will never be able to sell to the public. And as a result, it shaped our whole strategy, which was not to rely on out of the front door sales and direct sales to consumer, but to focus more on the LCBO. So that's why we are where we are, which is a little odd. That was one of the things, by the way, that Gary worked very hard to change. We were actually able to get our license to sell direct before they changed the law, because we found a bit of a loophole. We realized that we had our mash tun and another hot water tank that fed it. We're both 3,000 liters, so combined that's 6,000 liters. And all you have to do is put alcohol in there and heat it up, and you have a still.
there you go. There's the loophole.
So, I love it.
Okay.
And we actually got our license to do that literally the day before we sold our single malt on that April day back in 2012.
Jeez.
Okay. And let's say you opened 5 years after, you guys, and someone else did the groundwork like you did, you would have been able to have your tasting room and sell directly to them. And you would have been able to use that income as well to further develop the distillery. So it's too bad, but people are very happy that you did it. So thank you on behalf of all the other little distilleries out there that are benefiting from that. It's good. I've got another quote from you, Barry.
Well, hang on a second.
Oh, yeah.
But as you go to each province, what I notice is the first guys in are asking questions of the government they've never heard before.
Yeah.
And they always say no. Because if you go away, that's great. But Barry came back. I know a whole bunch of distillers that kept coming back, a whole bunch of brewers that kept coming back. And the government says, well, you're making us do a whole bunch of work. before we had to deal with just the big guys, and it was easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are you asking all these questions? So yeah, I've seen it with many distilleries. First guy in takes all, what do they say, the pioneers get all the arrows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a good thing because a rising tide floats all boats. One guy helping all the other guys, and then everyone together helps each other, and it's perfect that way. So,
but I look back to something Davin said, that there was a number of small distillers around Ontario, and I'm going to guess that Barry's the only one that's still standing out of that group of small distillers 10 years ago.
I think you'd be incorrect.
oh, okay.
Wow. When haven't I been?
We'll accept that. We're good.
So we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Well,
After Dram.
out of the first 4 micro distilleries, only 2 are around.
Yeah. Because it's historical that so many of the guys that start this, I don't care what industry you're in, they always leave the industry, and then new guys come in and part of the road's paved. So you guys pick it up and go from there.
And Davin always says the half-life of the new distillers is 5 years, and I think you changed that to a bit less than 5 years now for the half.
No, of whiskey fans.
Whiskey. Oh no,
Whiskey lovers, not
writer.
distillers.
Whiskey writer. That was it. Sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors here. I'm sorry.
What about whiskey bloggers? You don't like those guys either.
That's it.
I like people who write well
And it's not all those, not too many.
and aren't just echoing what somebody else has already said.
All right.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
Barry, I have you quoted as saying this: there's great whiskeys coming from big producers and great whiskeys coming from small producers.
Yeah.
But alas, some less than good whiskeys are also finding their way into the market. So can I assume that your willingness to mentor other soon-to-be distillers or brand new distillers is to enhance the general quality of the whole field? Is that why?
No, not necessarily. I think really our motivation for helping others was we recognized pretty early on that for us to be successful, we would need some of those changes to be made, and numbers were important. So it was just a question of encouraging others to enter the business and to have the whole industry grow. Yeah.
I want to talk about your still, just because it interests me, the very beginning of the startup process. And Davin has this, or Davin or Blair, one of the two wrote it. Several years of research is what it took you planning before you engaged Christian Carl to design your distillery, not just a still, but the distillery itself. I'd like to know what the process was. Is it more you telling them what you wanted, or was it more an interactive kind of negotiation between you where they took your suggestions and then came back with something? That's really interesting to me.
It was definitely interactive. Christian Carl is a German manufacturer, but their North American rep was, I believe, in Philadelphia. So when we expressed interest, he actually drove up to spend a day with us to really understand what we wanted to do. And to be honest, we weren't really sure because we didn't know that about distilling. And we talked about the possibilities and we, after that, for a few months, we went back and forth and to really spec out what we needed and what would fit in the facility. So it was definitely interactive and really a very good experience.
So did Carl send somebody over from Germany to start help you with the distillation process?
Yeah, not the. I'm trying to remember. I can't recall if he was there for the distillation process, but they sent the equipment over.
Yeah.
No instruction manual.
Yeah, well, actually, no instruction manual. There was one page.
It was in German, though.
Yeah. Notes and some rough sketches in German, which neither of us speak. Lots of little pieces. It took us about 3 weeks to put it together. And we realized that this was done by design because we know the equipment after 3 weeks, we knew the equipment intimately. We've been able to maintain it on our own without any help. We became experts in that equipment. So once it was together, Alexander, who's one of the brothers that owns Christian Carl from the family, flew over from Germany to spend a couple of days with us, just checking to make sure everything was okay. I honestly can't recall if he was there for the first run or not, but he did spend a couple of days with us making sure everything was set up.
We have a car. We have a Carl still also.
Did you have the same?
Was everything in the right place? Everything was perfect?
Yeah.
Everything worked really well. We put it together on the weekend and distilled the day after we put it together. So
it took you a weekend?
Yeah, they put it on the April long weekend.
How come it took us 3 weeks?
Because they already had a brewery. They were
so yeah.
Still,
we had a leg up on most people. So
yeah.
Sounds like an opportunity for IKEA, though.
Oh, don't say that. That's a lot of work.
Davin and Blair said you added another still, a 2,500 liter pot still. Did you talk to them about that, or you're on your own after you actually put it in?
Yeah, the purpose of that is strictly it's a stripping still. So we were looking for something inexpensive and efficient.
Because if you go back to those pictures, the still next that Daniel was standing next to looked like it was a pretty small still.
Yeah, it's a 450 liter. It's rated. It will actually take a 600 liter charge.
Yeah, because ours is 400. It looks just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Davin and Blair, I'm going to you guys now. I'm going to ask you a question about blending. For you, it's going to lead into something for Barry afterwards. But if single malt, I want to know if you can tell us if single malts or blends were the first produced in Canada, and if you can tell us about a particularly intense Canadian whiskey training program for blending. One of you, both of you.
Go, Blair.
Which one was first?
Well, Davin should field the historical question because he wrote the book on it.
Yeah. I think that Hiram Walker was the only distillery that made single malts. People weren't interested in malt whiskey back then. Right. The idea of distilling was to make alcohol. If it was made from molasses, it was called rum. If it was made from grain, it was called whiskey.
Yeah.
And, in Ontario, which is where the whiskey industry began, it was always made from wheat. And nobody had any interest in making single malt, except there were a couple of distillers in Perth. They set up two single malt distilleries there because it was a Scottish colony. It was a place where retired Scottish soldiers could get a land grant. And so it was a Scottish community. And they made malt whiskey there. Some of which incidentally was good, but most of which was flavored with herbs and spices and things like that. But of course, once rye whiskey came along, they couldn't compete anymore, and they all went out of business. But nobody really made single malt except for Hiram Walker, which made a single malt for quite a long time. I don't think they've made it for the last 100 years or so, but yeah, they made a fair bit of single malt. And then and Seagram's. They really kind of took a different approach because they were German, and they made 100% rye whiskey, and they made white whiskey back then too, mature white whiskey, by the way. Okay. And so it's a single malt it really wasn't a thing in Canada until the micro distillery movement came along. Can't be much more than 10 years ago.
Question for Davin: what do you classify mature as?
Well, that's a
so 2 years.
A subjective question, legally in Canada, if it's 3 years old, it's legally whiskey, but maturity might take a lot longer. It's when the balance is right. If you look in my first book, I got this thing that shows, how as it gets older, it gets better and then it gets worse. So, this band where the whiskey tastes tastes really good. But I mean, obviously that's a subjective thing. I mean, if you go over to Isla, for example, a lot of those guys who work in the warehouses, they drink new make. That's what they prefer. It's the flavor that you get used to. Seriously, I mean, in wine they call it cellar palate. People start to think that their own whiskey is the best whiskey that there is, or their own wine is the best wine that there is. So it's a matter of opinion.
I'm gonna switch gears to Blair then. The particularly intense Canadian whiskey training program for blending.
I can't think of it. I know that there's a lot of consultants that that go around from distillery to distillery that help blend whiskeys. Dr. Don Livermore has his program, is like 1-day workshop that he does, but I don't know. I don't think there's really a program out there.
Mentioned, or it was you about Crown Royal, what they do.
Yeah, but that's not something that like I could go off to Crown Royal school. I think that's their internal
in-house
thing.
What do they do though?
Well, it's an 8-year program. It's an 8-year program. You can't call yourself a blender until you've done this 8 years of there's a 1-year training program where you have to go through a checklist and you have to do certain things and answer questions, things like this. They test your palate. You have to be able to test every flavor that is likely to be found in the whiskey. And then you have to go through a period of sampling the whiskey, sampling the new make, and sampling the whiskey year by year as it's maturing, selecting barrels and things like this. And when you've got through a year, and when you've got through a full cycle, which is 8 years, then you may, or it could be up to 10 years actually, you may or may not continue on as a blender. But you need to pass what it's honestly, but in Crown Royal really, it's the gold standard for blending. There is no other, I mean, not just Crown Royal, but their process, which is used by Glenlivet, for example, used by Chivas, and it's the same as they use for Johnny Walker. It's insane what they go through to learn how to blend. But if you want to go to school to learn how to blend, the only one I've ever heard of in Canada was when that guy from McAllen came over and did an impromptu workshop at Odd Society, which honestly, if I'd known about it in advance, I'd have been there.
That would have been fun.
Yeah, it would have been great, you know.
Barry, having heard what Davin just described for Crown Royal, is it a surprise that you found blending took longer to develop than you expected? Because you mentioned that a couple of
Yeah. Truthfully, we found that the hardest part of everything that we've done. I mean, you know, distilling actually wasn't that difficult. Blending, it took us a long time. We started playing with it pretty early on, but weren't really comfortable with what we were producing until more recently. And there's a way I would consider ourselves experts.
I'm awake.
That bottle that you had, so the Canadian whiskey they had previously. So, did you feel pretty confident at this one, or did you really not like this one as much as the red and blue that came out later? I'm wondering why you changed.
Okay. Yeah, we were anxious to get a blended product out. So that the truth is, it's a very simple blend. It was easy because it wasn't very complicated, and also at the time our stock of whiskeys were much smaller and not as mature, which was part of the issue as well.
All right. And I had lots more questions, but we're past the hour, gentlemen. The time just flies. So what we're going to do now, if we can, Davin, Blair, Dave, and then we'll finish with you, Barry. If there's any last comments you want to say before we head off to the after dram or take our 5-minute break, go to the after dram. Davin, any last comments?
Every time I go into a decent liquor store in the United States, they have stock and barrel on the shelf, and I think that any whiskey lovers who are watching this show tonight should make sure they have stock and barrel on their shelves as well. It really is. It's the original of the craft distilling movement. I'm holding up the 3-barrel. We have the rye. Great whiskey. Thanks very much, Dolph, and I'll pass it on to the others. Oh, my book. Let's not forget my book.
Well,
Get that book back up there.
Oh,
You have a book?
Canadian Distilleries, yes. Everybody needs to have a copy for themselves and 2 copies to give as presents.
That's right. Christmas time coming up soon. Start thinking about Christmas presents.
actually, that's a good point Davin just made. Every year, 100,000 Canadians fall down the stairs and hurt themselves. The best solution is to have this copy for upstairs, this copy for downstairs, and no one gets hurt.
And you don't have to rush from one to the other because you know where they are. Dave. Blair.
All right. I got to say thanks to Davin and Blair. This has been, my education was that Scotch is where it's at. I've now learned that that's not exactly true. There's so many different flavors out there, so many interesting products. Canadian whiskey is really good.
Yum. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I want to thank both Davin and Blair as well. I think that what they've done is incredible for the whole Canadian whiskey industry, not just micro distilleries. And I think that the whole community is what's helping us succeed. So thank you.
Well, this has been a fantastic start to our evening. Thank you to the listeners. Thank you to the panel. Barry, Davin, Blair, and Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure spending this time with you, gentlemen. We're moving our conversation now from the distillery tour to not a tasting room, but let's say a corner of the distillery that's going to act like our tasting room for a more relaxed but equally engaging conversation. So co-authors Davin and Blair Phillips of The Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries, the portable expert to over 200 distilleries and the spirits they make, will of course be with us, because what better summer activity is there than traveling virtually, trying some cocktails, which we're doing next, spending time with great people. So please join us about 5, maybe a couple more minutes on this channel for the After Dram. And if you don't want to miss a minute of our next, I don't know how many weeks. I think we've got 4 weeks after this. Please,
it's 100, isn't it?
The like and subscribe button on the bottom. And gentlemen and ladies in our audience, we shall see you very soon. So cheers to you all. Thank you very much for spending this time with us.